Since 2016, we've been putting together 32 exhibitions with around 90 artists. What we do is to promote, support, and co-present exhibitions by a transgenerational roster of artists. As a Kunstverein, we also rely on members. I see some of our members here. And for those of you who are not members, you can become a member from as little as 55 Swiss francs per year. And there's more information on the white paper. So this afternoon we have here, we're delighted to have our co-director and co-curator Linda Jensen here on the left, in conversation with Marco Antonini, who's a Zurich-based artist, curator, writer, and poet. And today they will be talking about a passion that is joining them, which is Robert Smithson. They will go into details later, obviously. And what is important to note is that this conversation is based on Marco's graduation thesis, The Obsolete in Reverse, Robert Smithson's science fiction, which he completed in '94 at, I want to say correctly, at CCNY, and was also presented at the College Art Association conference in 2014 in Chicago, in a panel organized by Gregory Cholette. Just to give another sort of context to this conversation today, this is part of the public program of the current exhibition that you hoping that you can please sorry for being late. That I would like you to have a look at later on. It's by Lila Peacock, who's here in the audience, and Gilles Peloton, whose body of work is heavily influenced by science fiction. So for us, it made total sense to invite Marco and share his critical research and share it with the audience. Now I'm gonna give a bit of a bio info on our lecture today. I don't have my glasses, so I don't see.
Do you want the mic?
Should I? So, I'll try. Algerian, Danish, Swiss Linda Jensen has lived in Paris, Kuwait City, Warsaw, and New York before settling in Zurich. She was co-curator at Counterspace, project associate at the Institute for Contemporary Art Research at ZLK, and assistant curator at the Burger Collection in Hong Kong. Now to Marco. Marco holds 2 art history MAs, one from University of Bologna with a focus on pre-Renaissance art, and one in contemporary art history from the City College of New York. He was the recipient of Connors Fellowship for institutional students and held teaching positions at New Jersey City University, William Patterson University, and as lecturer at MoMA PS1 and the Solomon and the Guggenheim Museum in New York. Currently, he's working as a visual arts specialist for a multinational investment bank and financial service company. Before moving to Zurich in 2017, he worked as a performance and visual art specialist at the Lincoln Center for Arts and Heritage in Philadelphia, one of the largest arts and cultural grant makers on the East Coast of the US. From 2011 and 2016, he was director and curator of Nurture Art in New York, a non-profit organization and gallery dedicated to encouraging artists and curators. His independent curatorial projects have been presented in New York by Japan Society, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, Elizabeth Foundation Project Space, the International Studio and Curatorial Program, Abrams Art Center internationally by Bevilacqua, La Masa Foundation, Venice, Futura, Center for Contemporary Art, PRO, CCEG, Guatemala City, among many others. His writing on visual art has been published extensively and internationally. Thank you so much. Now back to them.
Thanks.
Hello everyone. I'm so glad that we could finally
do
this talk. I think we programmed it some 2 years ago, and it's a great pleasure and honor to have Marco here with us, so he can share his golden nuggets on Robert Smithson. Also, a big thank you for all coming here into this wonderfully dark and hot cavern. And I hope there are a few Robert Smithson fans in the audience. So let's start with the ultra basics. I'm going to lasso up a few questions. What were the early influences of Robert Smithson? What made him enter into the realm of science fiction? And what made this time traveler and hallucinatory style writer tick? Yeah, if you could let us know a little bit about what kinds of spatial and temporal developments that you explored.
Thanks for coming. First of all, let me know if you can hear me, otherwise I'll try to remember to keep this as close as possible. Yeah, so we talked about this paper a lot with Linda through the years, and this was my graduation thesis, so I spent a lot of time on it. I've always been a fan of Smithson, Robert Smithson, and many of you might remember his work in Earthworks, in land artworks. So he got a lot of attention and headlines in his age, when he was still alive. He was a very famous artist for bringing the lexicon of minimalist sculpture and conceptual art into nature, so realizing works that were like this monumental or non-monumental, we get to that later, sculptures in a sense, or devices, we'll see. In open spaces, with a certain grandiose approach also to this new form of art making. He was not alone in this. I mean, it was a current, throughout the world. But when I started going deeper in his work, I realized that there was like a whole building of unexplored or underexplored works that surrounded him. Many of his best people, many of the best writers that dealt with his work noticed this, so I was not alone in this. And as I went through the lesser known bodies of work, I started seeing an undercurrent of influences that connected to pop culture and then specifically to science fiction, of which I'm also quite fond. So I started mining this, and this research came through. I mean, there's a book version of it, there's an article version of it, there's a lecture version of it. If you go through the lecture version, it's quite short in this case, but it's a bit more extensive than this. The cover for the slide presentation, if you guys are wondering, it's not Smithson's work, but I love this artwork. It's by Mark Tansey, which is a postmodernist painter of the circa post-picture generation era, so late 70s, early 80s, and you can see in classic Tansey's style an almost monochromatic scene where the Native Americans, as if they were in the middle of some expedition, unrelated expedition, they stumble onto Spiral Jetty, you can see on the bottom there, and they're marveling at what is this. And so the painter, probably also a fan of Smithson, put this absurdist scene where you could see actually two civilizations in contrast, and also two time scales in fiction, because Native Americans roaming free like that, I mean, it will be many, many years before Smithson's Spiral Jet, which is, I think it's in the early 70s, work, If you go really all the way back into Smithson, some things from his biography pop out. He was a bit of a, lonely, nerdy teenager from the provinces in New Jersey, etc. And he made his way to New York out of, his own, because of his interests. And he started mingling with the artistic world of New York, and Smithson was young already and active in the late 50s, and this was still the era of abstract expressionists, and sort of the contemporary art that we think about when we think about him today still somehow didn't exist. He was hanging out at the Cedar Tavern, which was this tavern, this bar where most of the macho big abstract expressionist dudes hung out and did their man things, and he tried to mingle with that world. But his work at the time as an artist was really, I think in a certain sense, really exploratory. I mean, he started out as a painter and a draftsman and drawings, etc. And you start seeing immediately in his early work a conflation of different things, science fictional things, prehistoric things, religious things. Iconography coming from these three macro areas, blended together in a progression, in an early postmodernist approach to it. So he was already way out of modernism's linearity in a sense. So works like this one is an early 60s work. I mean, it is actually called dull space rising, which dull space is a pun on deep space, which is usually what's used in science fiction. It's deep space, not the depths of space. But dull space gives you a sense of something blunt and nondescript. Iconography is very complex because the figure that you see is somewhat a sarcophagus painting, like the way in late Egypt under Roman influence the sarcophagus used to be painted over it. There is a water sense to it, like a rising water, so it's, but you don't know if this is a diver, a spaceman, etc. The uniform might seem archaic to us, so it seems to go back to Roman details, etc. But actually, it was something that was present in science fiction also. Science fiction in itself went back sometimes to retro, prehistoric things, archaeological things. As I said, like so dinosaurs or prehistoric figures sometimes basically became transformed by pop culture as well. So King Kong also is a thing for Smithson. He used it a lot. King Kong is something of a dinosaur in a sense. I mean, like a creature that is extinct or doesn't exist anymore. So there was only one, no? Lost in the jungle and discovered. But at the same time, it's pure pop culture. And like, we don't know of King Kong in any other way than this, the movie and the comics, and he's a very cartoonish character, right? The dinosaurs or like giant apes or lizards, etc., that you see in the drawings for Smithson are in a sense a connection to primeval nature. So like these beasts that cannot be controlled, they're fearsome in a sense and uncontrollable. So he also was using this iconography in this way. So connecting in a certain prehistory, like the history that we cannot know because we have not experienced it, never will. We only know it through discoveries of bones and artifacts, etc., and the future, so the futuristic time. There are, these are early works that I showed you, and then this is a late drawing, and it's like 1 year before he died, and you still see some of the old things still at play. I love this drawing, and maybe we can come back to it at some point because it brings really this thing together with the future and past, in the sense that where like the machine that is like a currently state-of-the-art excavator machine of the time in which this was made is actually compared to a dinosaur, like a brontosaur of sorts, and it's fighting, in a clash against this King Kong. But this is not any King Kong. This is a mecha King Kong of like old Japanese science fiction movies. So a weirdly roboticized version of it.
I think there's also been some comparison that of the non-sites to the King Kong plot, where because in the plot of the film there was a film director navigating through this prehistoric time and then picking the specimen of King Kong and taking it to the center of civilization, New York City, and this kind of idea of transversal or containment, and I guess this is something that
he must have picked up. He watched a lot of movies. I mean, if you read his biography, you can see that he goes to movies quite often, and he goes to really crappy movies, like the worst of the worst. Like always, probably they were the cheapest movies, at these matinees in Times Square, etc., where you watch The Blob, or like Creatures from Outer Space, this campy science fiction things. So I'm sure he was picking up a lot of more than what we can tell, because not everything shows in the drawings, etc. But so basically, religion, prehistory, they were in a sense his first, the first elements you see in his work that seems to suggest an interest in a time stream that is not linear, a time stream that is fully postmodern, where like things in the past can become things in the present and can become things in the future, and they're somehow interchangeable. So yeah, I mean, in this period, sometimes people call it the pop period for Smithson, because you should not forget that this collage is 1963, right? Okay. So 1962 is the year in which Andy Warhol has his Campbell Soup shows at Ferus in LA, and it was peak. Richard Hamilton in the UK and Warhol in the US were like putting like the groundwork for pop, proper pop. And all artists of that generation were immersed in this change, where you would go abruptly from something like abstract expressionism, which is so lyrical and so like, in a sense, human, to pop, which is all about consumption, etc. And he tried to get his feet wet into this pop milieu. That we could look at dozens of works. It's very hard to pick, but just an example like this one, where you can see the pulp coming out, and again these lizards and creatures that are like otherworldly and somehow prehistoric looking, The image that he used in the center, the image that you see in the left is just one of many, pulp books that he owned. Fortunately, we have a great inventory of his library that's been preserved, so we know what he had and he was reading. And many of his books, of course, looked like the one on the left. I mean, this is a completely unremarkable book cover of this era, which was repeated over and over. It's like, as people that studied this, they called it the endangered woman trope, because there's always like a woman that looks like completely lost and like, deer in headlights, and then something about to unleash on her, or some man saving her, I don't know. So really, it is a really quite neat connection between the two, but you can see how it's a very outgoing style. It's colorful, the drawings are colorful, they're like poppy in their way. And for those of you who are more familiar with his work for later, which we will see today, it's quite striking, because the work then becomes really conceptual and contained and very controlled. So yeah, as we said, so monsters, dinosaurs, etc. Let's take that as a stand-in for nature, as an interest in nature, as something, and then and also an interest in time as a non-linear thing. Let's put it this way. So that there are consistencies between these early works. Let's keep them in mind a moment, and what we will see later on, and the work that he that made him an established artist. One of the first times you see a connection between the new and the old work is in an artwork that many people consider to be the first artwork of Smithson for real. Those who have an interpretation of his work that is traditional, let's say, they usually mention this work as the first of the real Smithson. I completely disagree, and I think most scholars would disagree today with this position. This photo is a bit, it doesn't say much, but it is a work that is called A Tour of the Monuments of Passaic. Passaic is where he was from. This is 1967. So Smithson also questioned a bit like what is an artwork, because the original format of this work was a spread inside Art Forum. That's the work. There was a double page, I think, with photographs from a tour. Literally, he went with some friends to Passaic industrial areas that were abandoned. And in the thing he wrote extensively in his career. He wrote a text that connected the shapes of these tubes and pipes and excavators, etc., to those of dinosaurs and prehistoric animals, and imagined this industrial wasteland as a sort of possible science fictional site of a dystopian future. So it's kind of interesting. Here, for example, you see a work of art that is a bit cold, because these photographs are a bit more rational, etc., still fishing from the same non-linear space-time concerns and deep history concerns that he had before.
I would interject here.
Yeah, totally.
And if you haven't read Monuments of Passaic, I think you should leave this, after you leave this talk, you should go home and probably read it. It's a few pages, and it's one of my favorite reads. And as Marco was saying, it completely changes our kind of value system of an urban fabric. So he navigates, like you said, through the space and sees the parking lot turned into a mirror monument, or tubes turned into fountains, or a sandbox turned into an entropy maker. And in this regard, I would like to ask you whether he had this interest in entropy both as a natural phenomenon, but also as something as a cultural phenomenon. Yeah. But at the same time, there were other texts that he wrote, like Entropy and the New Monument. Yeah. And I wonder if he was so interested in the monument, it seems a bit contradictory that he would be so interested in these entropic phenomena.
So entropy, I'm not a scientist, but I think the point of interest in entropy for Smithson was that, assuming that there is a law, an overarching law for everything, for all things in the world, that brings to fragmentation and to disorganization over a long amount of time, this was really sympathetic to his time conception of time, and going against linearity. It's something that remixes itself in a sense. So that's as much as I can say. The title of that essay, which is very dense and very interesting, but it would be another lecture in itself, The Entropy and the New Monuments, is interesting because it is, first of all, is an example of him being a critic, because he was an art critic like Donald Judd and others that made money by writing reviews of other people. It was, a way to make money. But so he reviews other minimalist artists' works, and the connections that he makes are like completely personal and original, because minimalism, in a sense, was pretty much assumed to be a long, extension of modernism, like increasing purity, increasing dehumanization in the sense of the art, while Smithson pulls out all these references coming from science fiction, etc. Like for him, something that's a monolith reminds him of the Kubrick monolith, the one in Space Odyssey, or a crystal shape. I mean, nobody would say that a Robert Morris sculpture would look like a giant crystal from outer space. That was not the prevailing. I mean, the texts about these shows were like deep with post-structuralist critique. It was very. They made it really complicated in a sense, but he saw different things. I mean, I think his interest in monuments is not ironic. I don't know how to say it. It's somehow almost in a way to deny them, because the monument that you have today, they call them new monuments, in fact, as if they're not supposed to be permanent, or as in assuming that nothing is permanent. One of the first sleek works that he made, like one of the first works by Smithson that looks a bit like all the other works by Smithson, is this object, that I think is now lost, but I think it was recreated at some point because I saw it in a show once. So somebody made a replica of it. Probably completely authorized, but don't quote me on that. It's 1964, so you can see it's really early work as well. And it is called The Eliminator, and it came with a text that explained the object. So now we see like completely different direction, because so far we've seen watercolors and drawings and sculptures that were made in traditional materials in a sense. Then here we see an object that is definitely industrial. It involves neon, so like to give you a sense, basically these are the metal, structures. That this is mirror on both sides, and also creating an infinity shot in a sense in the mirror. And then there is a zigzag of neon light that goes like flickers like that. So in a sense, it had something like it's a clock that doesn't keep time, measuring a rupture between past and future, ordering negative time as it avoids historical space, which I think the finale is the best one, as it avoids historical space. So it's very hypnotic, and it's something to lose yourself in. So William Burroughs and Brian Geisen also did this thing called dream machines in the 60s, etc., which were also optical instruments that you were supposed to just be tripping to, look at and like get completely like lost in it, So this is something like that as well. So an interesting thing for an artist so interested in time and time fractures, in the sense to create a clock, but a clock that is fully and completely dysfunctional.
And I think there was also some another earlier work, enigmatic chambers, that also had mirrors where actually would replicate the kind of molecular structure or mirror-like relationship.
It was another work that is similar to the Eliminator. Yes, we don't have a photo here, but it's also a metal structure with mirrors. We will get back to this mirror thing a lot because he uses them a lot. Where basically it was interactive, you could put your hands to it. It was at arm's length, and when you put your hand in it, your hand would seem to disappear, because for a mirror game, you will see the hand on the other side, or something like this, I haven't seen it in a long while myself, but it was in some show that I saw once. And this reflection, it's also a disappearance or something disappearing completely, is something that comes back also in this work. It has to do with reflection as a way to multiply reality, in a sense. So once again, not accepting a fixed reality, not accepting reality as a fixed scheme, of things. I mean, when you see works from something like, this is 1966, this is so close to everything we've seen so far, especially those drawings I showed you before. It looks impossible that this is the same artist, and this is Alon, a work that he did, which seems to show a progression, almost like a mathematical progression. It's something that Sol LeWitt would have done, in a sense. And it's really intriguing. The switch at this point is so sharp, between the previous work and this one. And if you look at at this as a question mark and say like, how did this happen? You have biographically like certitude in a sense, because between 1962 and 63, Smithson started making less work. He was a bit less involved with his art, but he studied more. And one of the things that he studied was crystallography. We had even the books that he had in his library that he studied on. And crystallography was like, you know, he hit the jackpot with this, because crystals are like a really Smithson thing. I mean, they are literally earth, but it is an earth that changes structure under pressure and under time, and because of chemicals, etc. So it's basically something super of the past, you know.
Some kind of molecular misalignment that's slow, layered.
Yeah, they actually keep growing as well, crystals, so they're not still as an object, you know. So they are in nature, they keep transforming. And when we unearth them, so if you unearth something, then you're like, all of a sudden you have not only something from the past, but something that looks distinctly futuristic, because it's otherworldly. You know, it doesn't look like of our world, and therefore it suggests that it could be from another world, although it's totally of the Earth. So this back and forth between future and past, it's very strong in the image of the crystal. And when he studied them, I mean, for example, see the thing that I said before, like not a bit parascientific, so if there are scientists, please correct me, but they are somehow moving crystals, you know, although it's an infinitesimally slow movement. So the incorporate, see the Jennifer Roberts, this is a quote from Jennifer Roberts, like, crystals gave him a chance to incorporate time and movement in a static form. And at the same time, one thing that should not be discounted is that crystals also look clean and geometric, you know, in an ideal way. And the art of the time looked clean and geometric. I mean, so the various Donald Judds, etc., were getting the best attention. And Smithson was very conscious of this. So I think he actually used also minimalism and conceptual art to, you know, to to connect to his real interests, which were in history and time, etc., and make it, you know, and give it a form that would be, how do you say, accepted by the contemporary art world that he was operating with. This is an interesting two things. I mean, this is a paper cut that he had in his archives that ended up also being an illustration in one of his texts. This is Secor, an early model of satellite. And he was fascinated with this satellite because, again, it's a Earth thing that goes into space. It's, you lose control over it, so it keeps going in space. It might last for like 1 million years and nobody knows where this is, blah, blah, blah. Also, like, almost impossible time shifts, no? Like, it communicates from super far, super fast with the world. And he related satellites and crystals, and if you look at one of the shapes here, the one on the outmost right on the second shape, it's actually, you can see that satellites, the ones that they built at the time, also sort of looked like crystals as well. So these are both 2 pages from his books. And he's, you know, from the crystal was like a bit of an entry point to then develop a vocabulary that was like really of minimalism in the way his work looked and felt, in a sense. So, and it all goes to the symbol of the crystal as this way of to conflate, you know, deep past and somehow future, because the crystals also are used in the engineering of software and of hardware and technology as well. So the things start to connect, the dots start to connect little by little. So in this collage that is from 1966, you see, for example, you know, a collaged landscape that could come from a photograph of a nondescript place, looks a bit like a desert here, but all of a sudden you see this cube, no, in it. This is just a collage, so he didn't do it in real life, but he would then move on to do this kind of thing in real life. And you can see that even since so early, he was fantasizing about the idea to put a geometric structure so rigid and so, you know, clearly, in a sense, unnatural, you know, clearly made by humans, in a natural landscape, and see what if, no, in a sense. And this image is clearly also, this is for everyone who has seen Space Odyssey by Kubrick, you know, this scene with the monolith, no, is massively influential to artists for different reasons, but for Smithson it was almost felt probably like a reinforcement of this idea that this could be a productive contrast, because we have a clip for this, yeah. We can see a clip from it just to savor it because it's so beautiful. It's very long, but we have you get sound.
Because it's
With this. to see two artists thinking in the same way. I mean, also the ape now that comes back also for Kubrick. He also goes on the same contrast, like the ape, the force of nature, pre-humanity in a sense, innocence if you want, in a certain way, and this monolith now that in the narrative for Kubrick, of course, it's the alien, visitor, whatnot, that brings civilization or whatever you want to call it. But for Smithson was like all about the visuals of this, like the contrast between these apes, like so the 0 degree of civilization and the utmost. So again, massive space and time contrasts. There are also like so many collages that also conflate things and bring things together in an interesting way. I mean, this one is a collage that exists in two forms, both the positive and the negative. But you can see that he has created the same situation of here, but much more complex. So you have desertic landscape, all of a sudden, random foreboding cube, certainly human-made or alien-made. And here, a more complex landscape involving humans, where Alogon, the sculpture that we have seen before, the one that was in this slide, it's actually featured, in this case, with a change of scale, as if it was an environmental thing, you see on the left. And then, here it starts, I could go on forever. I mean, the connections between his personal objects and books, etc., are massive. I mean, this book was mega influential in his life. We will get to it now. But you can see from the cover of the book that he owned, the version of Earthworks that he owned, actually I'm not sure he owned this one, but the one that he mentions, this book in one of his essays. Even the publisher, it says a signet version, he says it. So he's seen this cover, and you can see like there's an icebreaker, there's the same kind of landscape, there's the same kind of like mood in general. And the book is not just any book. I mean, this book is also seminal. When we saw that thing before with the spread for a tour of the monuments of Passaic, he starts the essay for that by saying, I was, waiting at a train station. I just bought a copy of a science fiction book called Earthworks, a signet paper book, so he says that it was this edition, and then he says very little about that, very little about this book, just a few words, and then he moves on to write his essay about the monuments of Passaic, as we said. But this book seems to have a larger presence because, first of all, the book is titled Earthworks, which was his way of defining his future work, of bringing this culture in the public realm, in nature. And he also even organized, where is it? Here, he organized a show at Virginia Dwan's gallery titled Earthworks. And look at also the lettering, it's really of its time. I mean, he's even using like lettering types that were frequent, in these kind of science fiction books and such. And because here, I mean, we're talking about these things because here we're moving, like we have these moments. So we've been talking about prehistory in a sense, then of crystals as a way to, and now we're going to the final part of Smithson's career, where one of the tropes that is most interesting is the desert, like the desertic spaces, like unpopulated spaces, and from these kind of works, then the interest in science fiction also becomes tied to the landscapes of science fiction. When you read a science fiction book, very often, I mean, as early as the 1930s or 40s, we already knew that these planets are empty, they're desert, they're inhospitable, right? So early dreams of science fiction as, we're going to take a spaceship and go to some other lush planet where we can all live, etc., were already shattered. Like by the time we were on the moon, it was already pretty clear that this was just politics, to go there. There was nothing for us to be had. And science fiction writers took on this, and so the settings of their novels were always like some really fucked up planet with like no water, or like some war, or everything with Mad Maxy kind of places, right? Furthermore, for someone who loved science fiction, then there was a whole lineage of artists that would make the cover of these books that Smithson had and loved, which referred to the American landscape in the covers of their books. So you have things like, you have an artist like Chesley Bonestell, which worked for Viking Press, so a very, very well-known publisher of science fiction imagery, etc., that unashamedly used the American landscape as space, so conflating the present and the future in a sense, in a way that's very striking, and he was not indifferent to this. And going into looking at deserts in the sense of a barren spaces, etc., for Smithson was a bit about, echoing his interest in this like science fictional scenario, and also and maybe subconscious way to like start like going out of the gallery, and like so like what's out there, and you know, if you want to build a big ass earthwork somewhere, etc., it better be a desert, because most people don't want it in their garden, you know, and they don't want you to cut down a forest to do that. So you know, they artists like Judd, Smithson, Walter de Maria, etc., they really actually functionally embrace the desert, because you could buy land for cheap and people would not bother you, and you could like build your thing and do your statement. You know?
I have a question related to that in terms of his writing, and how you were mentioning, of course, he was looking at monuments from the vantage point of science fiction, horror movies, and like the way that he would approach sculpture, which was atypical at that time in terms of the kind of art historical context and the terminology that was being used in writing. And you were just mentioning how he was kind of escaping that, and I wondered what kind of pursuit do you think he had in terms of going away from the institution and the gallery, and what kind of cultural climate was at that time?
I really don't, you know, Smith was very successful, you know, in his life, and respected almost immediately for what he did, you know. So you could say, of many artists you could think of, he didn't need to get out of the gallery system. I mean, the gallery system actually embraced him. You know, he was invited everywhere in Europe, you know, biennials, etc., to present his work. So I don't think it was something like a gesture against all of that. You know, I mean, it was really a genuine wish to work bigger and to work in a more ambitious way that would transcend, you know, what's possible in a gallery, in a sense. I mean, he used galleries all the time. He made works that look like landing art works indoor. At Dia in Beacon in New York, there's a beautiful one which is called Glass Island. It's a big island shaped like an island made of shards of glass, you know. So he would use the gallery space to do something that is a bit landy, you know, like land as an attitude. But I don't know. I mean, like the climate was. I mean, he was in it. He was enmeshed in it. He was writing about other artists. He was an it person, you know. Like, you know, he was really like well respected. So in a sense, you can't spin a narrative of Smithson at all like being an outcast or being some, misunderstood rabble-rouser. I mean, he was not. I mean, he was very daring, and he did things that broke the envelope or like pushed the envelope. But I think he was in it. I mean, he wrote for Art Forum, etc. He was part of art circles that are considered exceedingly exclusive by others. You know what I mean? So
I mean, he was in it, but at the same time, in his own library, as you were just talking about, like they cataloged his 1,000 book library, and he had no art periodicals, even of the stuff that he wrote for Art Forum. He had books on every category: religion, geography, science, but I wonder if that's...
I don't know about this, because I actually thought about this myself, but the reality is that Smithson was survived by Nancy Holt, you know, his wife, and I would say I can imagine that some of the things in his library also Nancy Holt had, you know, or wanted to keep. So I'm not 100% positive that everything that Smithson owned went to the Smithsonian. It's not a pun, it actually literally went to the Smithsonian. Each thing, you know, so like, you know, magazines, etc. I can't believe he didn't have magazines, and he wrote for them, so I'm sure he read them, you know. Maybe he's one of those types that doesn't keep magazines. I mean, they exist, but or maybe just Nancy Holt also had some out of the other things. I mean, he doesn't have in the library the Earthworks, the book he says in his own essay that he bought and read and he mentioned so many times. I mean, it's not there. So like as simple things like lending a book, or a book falls out of the pocket, or Nancy still likes to read that and she keeps it, could also influence that. I'm not sure, you know. I mean, it is an amazing library because of the diversity of the reads. I mean, he goes from medieval philosophy, you know, to esotericism, to pop culture, to like super trashy things like, you know, B-movies, pulp books, etc. So it was a very well-rounded person, great record collection. You know, he comes off as exceedingly serious, you know, as a person.
A lot of pop records.
Yeah, exactly, with good quality pop, rock, and, you know, party music in a sense. So that's also interesting, and, you know, so the book Earthworks is also, you know, it's the plot of the book in itself is an intro to this fascination with the desert. You know, the book is the title, the reason why it's called Earthworks is because it is a world where there is both a water and soil shortage. So soil has to be manufactured as well. There is no natural soil anymore. They have to make it because it's not fertile anymore. So in a sense, the desert is for him, coming from this catastrophist sort of like science fiction plots, a place of opportunity, for possibility. So together with the desert, sometimes you have the notion of catastrophe, because in the desert, sometimes the desert is a desert for a reason, because some catastrophe has happened that made it completely barren. And that also is an interesting aspect, because with catastrophe we go back to nature as a really, I would say, rootless entity. You guys are not saying anything, but I'm turning them in the wrong direction. We were talking about context more generally, like in society, etc. But this is also the years of this, like the years of like the Man on the Moon. Imagine the impact, visually, the aesthetics of these photos, which are some of the most circulated photos in the human history, even now that we have digital photography. The photos of the moon remain on the top of the chart. So for artists, but for common people in general, to see the planet from a distance, to see the reality of this horrible moon landscape, which has absolutely nothing for humanity, the absurdity of the space race in a sense, was very influential. And you can see things that are really connected. So here, like from some of his books, more catastrophe images. Maybe we go back to this later because I want to say more about Ballard. But look at this, how striking it is. This is actually the same year, only a few months distance, and it's the live cover for the moon landing, and the art forum cover disclosing Smithson's new artwork, which is called Mirror Displacement. It's a series. I can't remember where he was here, probably Yucatan. I don't know. Anyway, basically, look at even the texture of these two covers, and this is what Smithson was really super intrigued by, this image of the barren in the desert. This work is actually a work made with mirrors that are displaced along desertic areas and then photographed in a single image. So, where are we? I lost a bit. Yeah, we went into this. So, from deserts, etc., catastrophes covered. This is more Ballard. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of J.G. Ballard, but he was very influenced by it. He's a science fiction writer, and one of the new wave writers of the 60s that actually brought science fiction from being heroic and oh, we're taking a spaceship and going for an adventure, etc. No, Ballard is like, the world is fucked, you have to survive, and all brainy plot twists about people doing crazy things in this world, And the plots of Ballard's books are like, you can almost close your eyes and see Smithson artworks. There's one is called, I think, The Time Stream or something like that, one of the books that he wrote. And the final scene depicts a man creating a big glyph, or like a symbol in the sand, oversized, which reminds you of the spiral jet. Another book is called The Crystal World. The Crystal World is a book by Ballard, and nature basically is taking over and transforming humans and animals and plants into crystals, into monolithic crystals. It goes on and on. They both love each other. Ballard also knew Smithson, his work. I don't know if they knew each other in person, but he referenced him often with friends, and he really admired him. So,
and he wrote about his work
as well. Yeah. So this, for example, these are artworks by about catastrophe or etc. That are used to illustrate an essay that he wrote. So they were like literally recurring, but it's almost like a breadcrumb trail, these hints disseminated everywhere in his work. And the combination of Smithson's work, it's so iconic, this work, that it takes almost too much attention. It's like the fur cap for Merritt Oppenheim. Like these artists there's always one word. But of course it is incredibly majestic, this spiral that he built in Utah, in the desert, over a lake, which is very salty, so the water is, for some algae or something like that, reddish, and the basalt rocks and salt crystals were the material of this spiral sculpture. So we see here an example, there are so many, but of proper land art for Smithson. So this is where he terminated, in a sense, with all these considerations that we had. So the desert is there, the desert is the site. And time and space are there big time, you know, because in a sense you are like basically you have the time of visiting it, so like because you have to walk on it to experience it, you know, and the time of nature, because this thing is always in a fluctuating state. I mean, so many people actually traveled to see it and it was not there, it was covered by water, or sometimes the water goes completely away and it also becomes not so readable because it's all only rocks, you know, and the rocks, yeah, oh yeah, totally. We don't know the time.
Do you want the Ubu one or?
You pick. These are the opening scenes of the movies made for Spiral Jetting. Yeah, it's like, you know, from the monument is as much a movie as it is a So, hold on a second. Or we have, okay, yes, yeah, let's just look at, to give a you know, an overall.
Gazing intently at the gigantic sun, we at last deciphered the riddle of its unfamiliar aspect. It was not a single flaming star, but millions upon millions of them, all clustering thickly together, like bees in a swarm. Their packed density made up the deceptive appearance of solid, impenetrable flame. It was purple suns.
So much to say here. Like one of the things that's more key is this: is that okay, if you're making a gigantic spiral of rocks in Utah, and also somewhere in Utah that's hard to get to, you better do something else for people to see it, right? So like he made a movie, like, you know, a 60mm movie, super well produced, that went with it, and became part of the work, you know, like a substantial part of the work. And at the same time, he also hired like the best photographers that he could have, you know, at the time to photograph it super well and all of that. The movie is really key to understanding the work in itself, because if you go to see Spiral Jetty, you might be tempted to describe it in material terms, you know, like, you know, it's rocks, you know, like, you know, it's very solid when you're there. But you know, if you saw the clips, you know, since the beginning of the movie, it starts with solar flares, right? So from the first frame, you're not in the desert, and you're not on Earth. You're like in space already. And so, as you heard, he talks about it as a nebula, or like a constellation. And he's already like taking you somewhere else. So the physicality of the work is not there at all in the way it's narrated. But then he shows you how they made it. So that's super physical, super tangible. And even there, the machines, the bulldozers, etc., there are these little flashes where you have dinosaurs, you know, coming out, where you immediately make a comparison between the machine and the prehistoric animal as well. So there are so many junctures, you know, like, you know, different times, different spaces, and it's really quite amazing.
And the soundscape is very much like a science fiction film as well.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
Like the metronome, or like
Is
the
this
trucks, or
can you put back, okay, I don't know how to do it. It's the lighting of the movie of Spiral Jetty is very full of, like, you know,
That scale
It's the one we have with the voiceover.
don't exist physically in an urban space.
This is the stuff that can only happen outside of the city. You couldn't do a spiral jetty in a city space. But Smithson brought it into the city, I think. There was the importation.
Northeast by north, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. West by south, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water.
And I wondered about that importation. I started to think, is this a way of trying to turn your back on the city? If you're turning back on the city and go into land, landscape, country, are you turning your back on people?
So in a sense, spiral jetty becomes a place of synthesis, where many other elements of his work converge. Among the early works that we haven't seen, just to go really, really back all the way to the drawings that we see in the beginning, sometimes we have stigmata images, from saints and martyrs, so you have like stigmata on the hands or on the feet, and the stigmata in Smithson often looks like spirals themselves. It's so fascinating when you start unpacking in a sense all the references. And a great artist, Diana Tatter, she produced writing about spiral jetty from an artist's standpoint, and she found a wealth of connections with other popular science fiction movies of the time that Smithson might have looked at. We went quickly into Kubrick before, but there would be more from more pop science fiction books. And the treatment of the movie it's really quite incredible. I mean, there's a wealth of documents about how he storyboarded every second of this, the way it was filmed. And in the movie, and we actually heard a bit of that, there's a lot of voiceover with science fiction book segments, quotes. And one of them is by Taine. What was his first name? I forgot. John Taine, yeah. And this is also a book that Smithson owned, The Time Stream by John Taine. I don't own this book. I couldn't find this cover. Unfortunately, I have a little collection of these books that I bought for myself. But you can see it's amazing. The work is illustrated in this way. It's quoted in Spiral Jetty, and Spiral Jetty is also a spiral like this nebula that is on the cover. So it really is. It's incredible. Once you start, you never stop. I noticed that I wrote this in 2009. I think I defended 2010, and then in the few years. And even since there, way more has emerged. I was lucky to work on on the research of great scholars like Robert Hobbs, Jennifer Lawrence, Susan Böttger. I can remember Lawrence Holloway wrote about this science fiction thing, but it was always like a bit or a curio, And I was really enjoyed stretching the research all over his career and to see the connection points over and over. I think it's over. I don't know if we have
the finale with
the finale. Is there a finale? Well, the title of the lecture is really from this sentence that Smithson quoted many, many times, and it was from Nabokov. Not an art writer, but a writer, which is always often used to say the future is about the obsolete in reverse, which is so fitting for him. So not surprised that he used it over and over as a sentence. So that's where the title is from.
And in terms of your own work as a poet and writer, visual artist, how has this fed into your practice?
I think I don't know if it fed into it, but I think I started this because I was interested in the same thing with time. This different times strands in a sense, and memory, nostalgia as well. Because if you think about something like prehistory. It's not history. I mean, you cannot have nostalgia for prehistory. It's something wholly, entirely inhuman. We wouldn't even survive in it, or maybe the temperature of the air was too high or whatnot. No? And I think he has an interesting way of thinking about history, almost completely devoid of human terms. And I try to do in my work, visually and in poetry, etc., to create tales or fragments that are somehow self-supportive, self-standing. Self-autonomous in a sense, as if you want to try to experiment a bit of going out of history, But I am, I'm a human being, so I fish from my memory, and it's a short memory, right? And I think in Smithson, I always look up to him for an ability to try to reach fundamentals, that are really, shareable. I think these Earthworks are quite loved, there is a lot of folklore around them. I mean, we've seen that, for example, the painting by Mark Tansey at the beginning, you know, where somebody would take a picture of it in Utah. There are people who create, you know, manufacts and paintings of it for the tourists, etc. They're also like visited by people that don't know anything about art in the way we think about it, and that's quite lovely because they're just stunning, you know, they're quite amazing. And I don't know if he wanted to go into this sense, but I look up to him in the sense of like really trying to be a universal artist in a certain sense, and no pun intended with universe as a space locus, I think. But I think yeah, that's always been a connection. Also, he's quite unashamed to be you know, to look back. You know, like, you know, he's quite vulnerable in a lot of his works. You know, before you went into this phase at the end where everything is so like well done, we've seen there were many experimental phases, and he soldiered through all that part, like, you know, with integrity, and you know, and it was very often not fashionable. I mean, like, you know, Smithson had like a window of fashionableness and relevance that was quite short, mostly because he died so young. You know, we had no idea of how it would be today, you know, with his career.
Yeah, I found a very nice quote by Rodney Graham on also his like way of being like a meanderer. So I thought I would share that maybe as the finale. The figure of which, to my thinking, most adequately circumscribes Smithson's mind and writing is not the centralist circle, the spiral, or the labyrinth, but rather the meander, a figure that appears often enough in his work. It suggests a circuitous journey and a leisurely one, at least one guided ultimately by the imperative of the sightseer's pleasure. And the adjective meandering means full of windings, especially of a rather beautiful genus of corals, with the surface bearing an amusing resemblance to a fossilized human brain. So
Wow.
he's also going back to time.
Yeah. That's a really good one. Where did he write that?
I found that in one of the compendiums on Robert Smithson. I think they were it was in an essay bringing it back to his self-mythologizing and mythical status of today at post-studio, so what he means to artists in today's context.
It's great to know that there can be someone always, that an artist can be meandering, you know. I mean, I really like the idea. I mean, of course, then the meandering always results sometimes in like ideas that, you know, become tangible and concrete and like very focused, you know, in a sense. But I think there was a lot of meandering behind the creation of all of this, especially if you think about the variety of like references that they have. And again, you know, the whole story we said before, like that he was really, really alert and into pop culture, like in so many ways, you know, like and philosophy and religion, etc. Religion was also not an easy material to handle at the time. I mean, some of his creations, you know, like Turrell, like James Turrell, for example, they have a whiff, you know, of like spirituality and religion that's undeniable. You know, like, you know, it was declared only in the measure of his interest in religions of the past as a quasi mythical thing removed from us. But I think he also had something like this in him. You know, that would be an interesting study. I mean, like, there's now just recently a biography has been released on Smithson, you know, by Susanne Böttger, and I can't wait to read this book because there isn't a biography of Smithson, and this is a research that I really look forward to read into, because you get the feeling from, I hope we got the feeling with you as well today, you know, that there really is a lot of personal substrate, you know, to all these choices and decisions that he makes, and they're really so original. I mean, I would love to know more. we hear always these anecdotal things that are quite cool, you know, that when he was a child he had made a museum of dinosaurs in his basement. And that he was, you know, that he loved the Natural Art Museum in New York. And if you've been to a Natural Art Museum, it's a place that's full with these retro dioramas and depictions of prehistory and primordial states, geology. There's the geology wing, etc. We know a bit of his interests, etc. For the rest, he was quite guarded. And I was just talking to Lila before, you know, like, he was a great writer. And this is a bit of a curse, because he wrote so well and so much about his own work that he really directed the narrative of his work so well that only when he died it was possible to look back, in a sense, and really take full, you know, advantage of all the tracks that he left and put them together, because he would not have done that. I mean, I don't think you would have been able to grill Smithson in his life and say, tell me about those saints with the stigmata. So it's like, did I make that? You know, like, I don't know, I feel that he would have also, you know, a bit, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm also curious to read this upcoming book because, and this is a speculative line that I'm going into, but the way that he approached time in this kind of very flexible, non-linear way, and the kinds of ways that one could have looked at science fiction back then, this kind of reoccurring theme of the invader, or like this kind of the invader as this symbol of someone coming in and being against this conservative time period of homophobia, but also the other, the Soviet, whether there might have been a direction there in terms of his own sexual identity.
No idea. I mean, it's undeniable that there is a series of works early on that belong to the kind of works that we've seen. These ones. We don't have any in the lecture now, but you know, there's probably Linda found some that have like homoerotic overtones. You know, you see like, you know, a mix of cherubs, astronauts, classical figures. You know, like Greek and Roman stages with these like muscular bodies. This is a collage. This is even more atypical. Like the ones I was thinking about, they're still drawings after all. I think that there's a way, you know, you could say, oh, you know, like you're using this, you know, like, you know, queer, you know, imagery, etc., as a way to just like reinforce, you know, your postmodernism, postmodernist stance, not mixing up high and low, etc. But then the material, like the visual materials, comes from specialized magazines. You know, there were homoerotic magazines too, and an imagery that was not so common, you know, if you were not into that topic. So, but that's something for, you know, for a biographer to look into, for sure, you know.
I mean, it comes up in his prop works with kind of the sleaze image, the sexual one, but I just wondered if, like, nowadays there's this terming of queer abstraction, whether there could be then also a link to Robert Smithson's work in terms of showing a queer identity, not through your usual figurations of desire or something that's more embedded and complex.
It's too complicated, but there's before in the movie there was a sentence by Michael Heiser, the voice like this, you know, he said something. Is this a way of moving away from people? You know, like that's something I've thought about, you know, more than identity, etc. I've been thinking about not misanthropy, but you know, in a sense of like really, like he was sort of like a unique person, like, you know, sort of self-contained in a way. And I also thought sometimes, I mean, is this art for humans at all? You know what I mean? I mean, you know, he's in his way of trying to be universal. It's almost like there are almost messages that are not relatable to everyone, but no one in a sense. So that's more the way I've seen it, etc. But you know, I think iconographically these early works like this one, and there's a few more that have this more precisely, you know, homoerotic overtones, etc. They should be studied as a body of work, I think, because I don't think they are a trend that is visible throughout his career. Perhaps they were a mood or a situation, there are circumstances to a certain some experiences he went through, or a place where he was, or artists that he frequented, you know, because he was friends, for example, with Paul Thek, and he liked Paul Thek's work. And in Paul Thek, you can see, you know, a different texture, you know, and a different confidence in assessing things like, you know, identity, or, you know, and but yeah. More things to study next lecture. All right. Well, thanks everyone. If you have any questions now.